The silence of a Parisian hotel suite at 4 a.m. is a unique kind of perfect. It's a velvet quiet, thick with the ghosts of yesterday's triumphs and pregnant with the promise of tomorrow's dawn. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, the city of lights a glittering, sleeping beast below. My latest collection, Ethereal, was finally, blessedly complete. 10 years. 10 years I had poured into the House of Devereux, my entire adult life, building it from the elegant but fading legacy of my mentor, Arthur Devereux, into a global powerhouse. He'd found me as a raw, hungry intern with a sketchbook full of impossible dreams. He never saw me as just an employee. He treated me like a daughter, seeing a fire in me that I didn't even know existed. He used to say, "Khaleesi, fabric has a soul. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it speak." When he passed, he left the business to his wife, Isabella, but everyone knew he left his creative legacy, the soul of the company, in my hands. I was Khaleesi Warren, his chosen successor, and for the last decade I had honored that sacred trust with every fiber of my being. I traced the rim of my water glass, my reflection a pale shimmer against the glittering backdrop of the city. Every stitch of Ethereal was a piece of me. It was my ode to him, a collection born from light and memory. The hours spent draping silk charmeuse until it fell like captured moonlight, the arguments with the Italian mills over the precise shade of silver thread, the nights I'd slept on a cot in the atelier just to be near the work as it came to life. It was more than a collection. It was my masterpiece, a final love letter to the man who gave me everything. A wave of bone-deep exhaustion washed over me, but it was the good kind. The kind that comes after you've left everything on the field. I was 32 years old and I was at the very pinnacle of my world. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a harsh, unwelcome sound in the sacred quiet. Then it buzzed again. And again, a frantic, insistent vibration. A cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Good news never arrives with such frantic urgency at 5 in the morning. I reached for the phone, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. It wasn't a single text message. It was a flood of notifications, a tidal wave of tags and alerts from every fashion publication on the planet. At the top of the list, a headline from Women's Wear Daily, the industry's Bible, screamed in stark digital print. House of Devereux terminates creative director Khaleesi Warren amid plagiarism scandal. The words didn't register at first. They were just shapes on a screen, a language I didn't understand. Plagiarism? Scandal? My fingers, numb and clumsy, clicked the link. There it was, in cold, corporate black and white, an official press release from the House of Devereux. It spoke of credible allegations, of an internal investigation, of protecting the brand's intellectual property, and the necessity of a bold new direction. And then I saw it, the image that made my blood run cold. The proof. A side-by-side comparison of one of my most intricate designs from Ethereal, a gown I had agonized over for months, next to a crude, amateurish sketch from some unknown design student, conveniently dated 6 months prior. It was a fabrication, a clumsy, insulting forgery, but it was presented as immutable fact to a world that loves nothing more than a spectacular fall from grace. This wasn't a corporate restructuring. This was a character assassination. I scrambled to open my company email. Access denied. My corporate credit card app. Account deactivated. The company's Slack channel. User not found. It was a digital execution carried out with surgical precision while I slept, thousands of miles away from everything I knew. Isabella. The name was a venomous hiss in my mind. She had waited. She had let me pour my entire being into this collection, waited until it was complete and perfect, and then she had pushed me off the cliff. She wasn't just firing me. She was erasing me from my own life's work. The room began to spin. I stumbled to the bathroom, gripping the marble countertop, and splashed cold water on my face. The stranger in the mirror was a hollowed-out version of me, pale, wide-eyed, terrified. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. 10 years of my life, my reputation, my work gone, wiped out by a press release before I'd even had my morning coffee. My phone rang again, a piercing shriek that jolted me from my trance. This time it wasn't a notification. It was an actual call, an unknown number with a New York area code. I almost ignored it, wanting to curl up and disappear, but some primal instinct for survival made me answer. Hello? My voice was a raw whisper, the sound of a string stretched to its breaking point. Ms. Warren. The voice on the other end was deep, calm, and radiated an authority that cut through my panic like a scalpel through silk. My name is Julian Croft. I'm currently in Paris. I believe you and I should have a conversation. Julian Croft, the legendary former editor of Vogue, the most feared and respected critic in the fashion world, a man whose opinion could build an empire or crumble one into dust. His name was a myth, a legend. What in God's name could he want with me now, in my moment of utter ruin? Where? I asked, my voice barely audible. The café at the corner of Rue de Rivoli and Rue de Castiglione. 30 minutes. The line went dead. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a quiet corner of that Parisian café, an untouched cup of espresso growing cold in front of me. I felt hollowed out, a ghost haunting my own life, watching the world move on without me. Julian Croft arrived precisely on time. He was in his early 60s, with a mane of silver hair, impeccably dressed in a dark cashmere coat, and possessed eyes that seemed to see right through the fragile facade I was trying to maintain. He didn't offer condolences or empty platitudes. He sat down, ordered a black coffee, and looked at me with an unnerving intensity. "Isabella is a fool," he said, his voice as crisp and cool as the morning air. "But she is a predictable one." I stared at him, speechless. "I knew Arthur Devereux for 20 years," he continued, stirring his coffee with a slow, deliberate motion. "Arthur built his house on talent. Isabella only knows how to build on deceit. She has resented you from the day Arthur first called you his creative heir in my presence. She saw you not as a protégé to be nurtured, but as a rival for his legacy. He knew, he saw it all. He spoke of my Midnight Bloom collection that saved the company from bankruptcy 5 years ago, of the exclusive contract I personally secured with the supermodel Elena Vance that made the brand a household name. He wasn't just listing my resume, he was validating my entire existence at Devereux, an existence that had just been declared a fraud. As he spoke, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marco Bianchi, the head of production at Devereux, a man whose loyalty was to Arthur's memory, not to Isabella. "Khaleesi, it's a nightmare here. They're removing your name from the Atelier archives. Isabella just held a staff meeting and announced that she will be personally overseeing the launch of Ethereal as her own heartfelt tribute to Arthur. She's taking credit for everything. She's stealing your soul." I read the message, and a new emotion, hot and sharp, pierced through the layers of shock and grief. Rage, pure, undiluted rage. She wasn't just firing me, she wasn't just slandering my name. She was stealing my tribute to Arthur. She was going to stand on that runway, basking in the applause for my work, my heart, my final goodbye to the man who was more of a father to me than my own. I looked up at Julian, my eyes burning with unshed tears of fury. He saw the shift in my expression, the hardening of my features. He nodded slowly, a grim, knowing look on his face. "Good," he said softly. "The shock is over. Now the anger begins. That is what we can use." "Use for what?" I asked, my voice shaking. "She's already won. She has the collection, the company, the press machine. She has the bricks and mortar," Julian corrected, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "You have the talent, you have the loyalty of the people who matter. What she did today was not a victory. It was a fatal mistake, and we are going to make her pay for it." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I'm not going to offer you a job, Ms. Warren. Job offers are for people who have been fired. You have been liberated. I am going to offer you a partnership. I will provide the capital, the connections, the strategy. You will provide the genius." My mind was reeling, struggling to keep up. "What are you proposing?" "We are going to build your own house, from the ground up. Brand name, Warren. We will work in secret. We will build a new collection from scratch, one that will eclipse Ethereal in every way. And we will debut it during New York Fashion Week. In an unofficial, off-schedule show, 2 hours before the House of Devereux presents your old work. We will not just prove your innocence to a few lawyers. We will prove it to the entire world, and we will make her entire show, her entire brand, irrelevant in the space of a single afternoon." The sheer, glorious audacity of it left me breathless. It was insane. It was impossible. It was perfect. It was a plan born not of defense, but of pure, beautiful, strategic annihilation. Before I could even respond, my phone rang. The screen flashed with a name that brought a lump to my throat: Elena Vance. Khaleesi, her voice was a furious torrent. "I just saw the news. It's a disgusting lie. I'm putting out a statement right now. I'm not walking for them. My contract is with you, not with that building. Wherever you go, I go." I hung up, my heart swelling with a desperate gratitude. Another text from Marco arrived. 5 of the top seamstresses just walked out. They said they won't work for a thief. They are with you. Julian smiled faintly, a chilling, predatory smile. "You see, Isabella thinks business is about contracts and press releases. She never understood. Business, real business, is about people. And the people are with you." He paused, his gaze steady and serious. "I have a personal reason for this. Years ago, Isabella did something similar to a young designer I was mentoring. A brilliant boy, she destroyed him with rumors and lies, and he never designed again. I was not in a position to fight for him then. I am now. This is not just about your future. It's about correcting an old wrong. A fire I thought had been extinguished began to burn in my chest, hotter and brighter than ever before. This wasn't just a job. It was my name, my life's work, my promise to Arthur. I looked at Julian Croft, a man I had known for less than an hour, and I saw not just an investor, but an avenging angel in a cashmere coat. The flight back to New York was the longest 8 hours of my life. I didn't sleep. I scrolled through the articles, the vicious anonymous comments, the two-faced messages of sympathy from industry insiders. The pain was still there, a raw, open wound. But now it had a purpose. I pulled a blank notebook and a pen from my bag. At the top of the first clean page, I wrote a single title: The Phoenix Collection. I started to sketch. Ideas poured out of me, fueled by a potent cocktail of grief and fury. Designs that were sharper, bolder, more defiant than anything I had ever created for the classic elegance of Devereux. Asymmetrical lines, dark, bruised colors, silhouettes that spoke of armor and resilience. This would not be a collection about ethereal beauty. This would be a collection about rising from the ashes, with fire in your eyes. When the plane began its descent into JFK, the clouds breaking to reveal the familiar skyline, the exhaustion was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. Isabella Devereux thought she had buried me in Paris. She had no idea she had just planted a seed. The war was just beginning, and I was coming home to fight it. The moment I stepped out of the terminal at JFK, the crisp New York air hit me like a jolt of electricity. It wasn't the gentle, perfumed air of Paris. It was sharp, unforgiving, and full of a brutal energy that matched the storm brewing inside me. Julian was waiting for me, not with a car service, but leaning against a classic black town car, his presence an island of calm in the airport's chaotic river of humanity. He simply nodded, took my suitcase, and opened the door. The unspoken message was clear. There was no time to waste on sentiment. The war had begun. We didn't drive to my apartment, a place that now felt tainted by a life that was no longer mine. Instead, we headed downtown to Soho. The car stopped in front of a nondescript iron door on a cobblestone street. Julian led me up a creaking freight elevator, the kind that smelled of oil and history. It opened directly into a vast, empty loft. Sunlight streamed through massive, grimy arched windows, illuminating a universe of dust motes dancing in the air. The floors were worn hardwood, the walls exposed brick. It was raw, immense, and utterly empty. "This is your atelier," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "And your war room." It was perfect. It wasn't the pristine, white-walled laboratory of the Devereux studio, a place that had started to feel more like a museum than a creative space. This place had grit. It had a soul. As I stood in the center of the room, the elevator rumbled again. It opened, and my breath caught in my throat. Marco stood there, his face etched with worry but his eyes full of fierce loyalty. Behind him were 5 of my top seamstresses: Maria, Sophia, Anya, Chloe, and Lynn. My team, my family. They hadn't just walked out, they had walked straight into the fire with me. Tears I didn't know I had left to cry welled in my eyes. Maria, a woman whose hands could make silk sing, stepped forward and simply hugged me. No words were needed. In that embrace, I felt the first true flicker of hope. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. The next few days were a blur of controlled chaos. Julian was a force of nature, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of revenge. While my team sourced sewing machines and cutting tables, turning the empty loft into a functioning atelier, Julian handled the business end. He secured the initial round of funding from a private equity group that owed him a significant favor, establishing Warren as a legitimate, albeit secret, entity. Then he brought in the lawyer. Her name was Evelyn Reed, a woman with a reputation for being a shark in a Chanel suit. We met in the half-finished studio, surrounded by bolts of fabric and rolls of patterned paper. "Let me be clear," Evelyn said, her eyes sharp and analytical. "We are not suing for wrongful termination. That is a messy, public battle that makes you look like a victim. We are on the offense. We are going to establish your intellectual ownership of the ethereal collection so completely that if Isabella dares to show it, she will be committing career suicide in front of a global audience." Her plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would not engage in a public mudslinging match. Instead, she would draft a quiet, brutally effective cease and desist letter. It would be delivered to the Devereux board of directors, not to Isabella. The letter would outline, with excruciating detail, my entire creative process for Ethereal. It would include dated video clips of me draping fabric on mannequins, time-stamped digital sketches, and sworn affidavits from the fabric mills in Italy I had worked with. It wouldn't threaten a lawsuit. It would simply state a fact, that if the collection was shown, we would release this entire dossier to the press the following morning. It was a checkmate move, designed to turn the board against their own CEO. While Evelyn prepared the legal artillery, I threw myself into the creative furnace. The pain of betrayal was a strange and powerful fuel. Every article that called me a fraud, every condescending quote from Isabella about her new vision, I channeled it all into my work. The Phoenix collection began to take shape, not on paper, but directly on the mannequins. I worked with a furious energy, draping, pinning, and cutting fabric myself. The designs were a direct reflection of my state of mind. The silhouettes were architectural and sharp, like shards of broken glass. I used fabrics that felt like armor, structured leather, metallic brocades, and silk treated to look like liquid smoke. The color palette was dark and bruised, deep charcoals, midnight blues, blood reds, with shocking flashes of fiery gold. It was a collection born of pain, but it was not about victimhood. It was about power. It was about survival. Marco was my lifeline to the outside world, providing intel from his contacts still inside Devuro. The news was grimly satisfying. Isabella was in over her head. "They can't replicate your draping technique for the finale gown," he told me over a clandestine coffee. "She brought in another designer, but he doesn't understand the internal structure." Marco shook his head. "It looks like a child's clumsy school project. The soul is gone." He also told me that the press release had backfired. Instead of quietly disappearing me, it had made me a cause célèbre. Small, independent fashion blogs began questioning the official story. Why would Devuro fire its greatest asset right before a major show? The narrative Isabella had tried to control was beginning to fray at the edges. The first major blow to her fortress came from Julian. One afternoon, he walked into the studio and handed me his phone. On the screen was the homepage of Vogue's website. The lead story was a long-form opinion piece penned by a respected senior editor. It was titled, "The Soul of a House, When Talent Walks Away." The article never mentioned my name directly, but it didn't have to. It was a masterful dissection of what happens when a corporation values branding over the singular genius that creates it. It spoke of legendary designers of the past who had been pushed out only for their houses to crumble. It ended with a chillingly prophetic line: "A house without its soul is no longer a home. It is merely a beautiful, empty tomb." The entire industry knew exactly who and what it was about. The second blow came a day later. I received a forwarded email from the head buyer at Net-a-Porter, one of Devero's largest and most prestigious retail partners. It was a polite but firm message addressed to Isabella's new head of sales. "Given the recent and unexpected changes in creative leadership at the House of Devuro, we will be placing our seasonal order, valued at $8 million, on a temporary hold pending a review of the upcoming collection." They weren't just questioning the drama, they were questioning the product. Without me, the multi-million-dollar orders were no longer guaranteed. I could almost hear the sound of Isabella's panicked breathing from across the city. The final piece of our pre-show strategy fell into place that Friday. Elena Vance, true to her word, had refused to even speak with Devuro. Instead, she gave an exclusive interview to Vanity Fair. When the interviewer asked why she had pulled out of the most anticipated show of the season, Elena looked directly into the camera, her famous eyes blazing with conviction. "Fashion at its best is about truth and loyalty," she said. "I am loyal to the artist, not the canvas. My loyalty is with the true creative mind behind that house, and that mind is no longer in the building. Wherever she goes next, that is where you will find the future of fashion." The interview went viral. Whereas Khaleesi started trending on Twitter, we were no longer just a secret project. We were a movement. That evening, I stood alone in the center of the atelier. All around me were the fruits of 3 weeks of sleepless nights and relentless work. Half-finished garments stood like an army of beautiful ghosts on their mannequins. The air hummed with the quiet energy of creation. My hands were raw, my body ached, but for the first time since that horrible morning in Paris, I felt whole. I was no longer the victim of Isabella's story. I was the author of my own. We had built the foundation. We had assembled the army. We had declared war on the legal and public fronts. Now, only one thing remained: the show. The final, public execution of my revenge. The week leading up to Fashion Week was the calm before the storm, a deep breath before the plunge. Evelyn Reed, my lawyer, made her move on a Tuesday morning with the silent, lethal grace of a predator. She didn't send a threatening email or file a noisy public lawsuit. Instead, a legal courier, dressed in a sharp black suit, hand-delivered a sleek, heavy portfolio to each of the 6 members of the House of Devereux's board of directors at their private offices. It was a move of calculated intimacy and intimidation. Inside was not a legal threat, but our meticulously compiled dossier, a silent, damning narrative of creation. It was a story told in evidence. There were high-resolution videos of me working late into the night in the old Devereux atelier, my voice hoarse with exhaustion as I explained a new, complex seam to Maria. There were time-stamped digital sketches from my personal tablet, showing the evolution of every single piece from a nascent idea to a fully realized design. There were sworn affidavits from the Italian fabric mills detailing my specific, custom orders for the unique textiles that formed the collection's heart. The portfolio ended with a single, chillingly polite page, printed on thick cardstock. This evidence and more will be provided to select members of the press should the ethereal collection be presented as the work of anyone other than its creator, Khaleesi Warren. We trust you will act with the discretion this situation requires. The fallout, according to Marco's inside sources, was immediate and volcanic. The board convened an emergency meeting that afternoon via a frantic series of video calls. Isabella was summoned. There was screaming, threats, and accusations. She had exposed them all to a catastrophic level of legal and public relations risk. But her ego, a monstrous and brittle thing, was too massive to allow for a retreat. She reportedly assured them it was all a bluff, that I was a disgruntled, hysterical former employee trying to extort the company. She promised them the show would be a triumph, a spectacle so dazzling it would silence all the rumors and make me a laughingstock. The board, trapped between the public humiliation of canceling the year's biggest show and the potential implosion Isabella was courting, reluctantly agreed to let her proceed. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Her power base was fractured. She was no longer their queen, but their liability. 2 nights before my show, Julian hosted the masterstroke of his strategy. He called it a private viewing, but it was a power play of the highest order. In our now beautifully chaotic Soho loft, surrounded by the nearly finished Phoenix collection glowing under temporary spotlights, we welcomed 10 of the most influential people in fashion. Not just editors, but the CEOs of Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue, the head buyers for the major European luxury conglomerates, the kingmakers who write the multi-million-dollar checks. I walked them through the collection myself, my voice steady and confident. I explained the story behind each piece. The sharp, armored shoulders of a leather jacket representing defiance, the deep, blood red of a silk gown symbolizing the pain that was being transformed into power. The final piece, a sweeping coat meticulously embroidered with a golden phoenix, its wings spread wide in a moment of glorious rebirth. There was a reverent silence in the room when I finished. The CEO of Bergdorf Goodman, a notoriously stoic woman named Eleanor Vance, simply looked at me, her eyes surprisingly gentle, and said, "This is not just a collection, my dear. This is a resurrection." By the time they left in the early hours of the morning, a silent pact had been made. They had seen the truth. They were on my side. The night before the show, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, I answered. Silence. Then a ragged, shaky breath. "Khaleesi?" It was Isabella. Her voice, usually so imperious and controlled, was a thin, desperate whisper, stripped of all its artifice. "We can make a deal. A financial settlement, whatever you want. Just call this off, please." It was the first time I had ever heard her say that word. Please. It was the sound of a queen realizing her castle was made of sand, the tide was coming in, and she was utterly alone. I said nothing. I simply ended the call and blocked the number. There would be no deals. There would only be a reckoning. The day of the show arrived, a cold, gray Monday. Our venue was a raw, abandoned warehouse in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, a deliberate contrast to the opulent, gilded ballrooms Devereux favored. There were no assigned seats or plush chairs, just stark concrete floors and a single, dramatically lit runway. The invitation, sent out via cryptic text message just 12 hours prior, had caused a frenzy. The entire fashion world knew something was about to happen. By the time the doors opened, the place was packed far beyond its intended capacity. Editors, buyers, and influencers stood shoulder to shoulder, a palpable current of anticipation crackling in the air. Backstage was a whirlwind of focused energy. I moved through the controlled chaos, adjusting a collar, tightening a belt, and giving a final nod to each model. Elena Vance, who was opening the show, gripped my hand, her knuckles white. "We're going to burn it all down," she whispered, her eyes shining with a warrior's light. I squeezed back, a surprising calm settling over me. "No," I said, "we're going to rise from the ashes." Then the lights went down. A single haunting cello note filled the vast industrial space. A spotlight hit the runway entrance. Elena emerged, not in a soft, ethereal gown, but in a severe black leather coat with shoulders sculpted like the wings of a raven, her face a mask of fierce determination. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. This was not the Khaleesi Warren they knew. This was someone new, someone dangerous. For the next 15 minutes, I sent my army down the runway. Each look was a sentence in my story. The pain, the anger, the resilience, the first sparks of hope. The finale was the phoenix coat, worn by a model with fiery red hair, the golden embroidery catching the light like flickering flames. As she reached the end of the runway, she paused, and a slow, defiant smile spread across her face. The music swelled and then cut to absolute, shocking silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the room exploded. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar. A visceral, cathartic standing ovation that felt like a validation of my entire existence. I stepped out onto the runway, the bright lights blinding me as tears streamed down my face, and I took a bow. I wasn't bowing to them. I was bowing to the woman I had been forced to become in the fire. 2 hours later, the industry reconvened for the main event, the House of Devereux. The atmosphere was tense, poisoned by comparison. My show was all anyone could talk about. When the lights came up on Isabella's opulent stage, the contrast was brutal. The ethereal collection, my beautiful, delicate dream, looked like ghosts from another life. The models walked without conviction. The garments, slightly altered and ill-fitting without my team's expert hands, lacked the life I had breathed into them. It was a beautiful collection, but it was hollow. It was a body without a soul. The show ended to polite, scattered applause and an uncomfortable, echoing silence. The critics didn't even need to write their reviews. The verdict was already in. As people filed out of the venue, their phones began to light up in the dim light. Julian had just published his piece on the Vogue website. The title was simple and lethal: The Phoenix and the Phantom. It was a devastating, side-by-side account of the two shows. He described my collection as a primal scream of rebirth and Devereux's as a faint, tragic echo. He didn't need to use the dossier Evelyn had prepared. He didn't have to mention plagiarism at all. He simply laid out the artistic truth of what everyone had just witnessed with their own eyes. The emperor had no clothes. I was back at the loft, sharing a bottle of champagne with my exhausted but triumphant team when my phone buzzed. It was an email with a single attachment. A press release from the Devereux Board of Directors, time-stamped just 5 minutes prior. Effective immediately, it read, the Board of Directors has voted to terminate the employment of CEO Isabella Devereux. An interim CEO has been appointed as we begin the search for new creative and executive leadership. I read it out loud. A cheer went up in the room, but I felt a strange sense of quiet. The rage that had fueled me for weeks had finally burned itself out, leaving behind a profound and peaceful emptiness. The war was over. I had won. The next morning, the real victory began. My new business phone, which had been silent for a month, started ringing and didn't stop. It was Net-a-Porter, wanting to discuss an exclusive online retail deal for the entire collection. Then Bergdorf Goodman, offering me a permanent in-store boutique. By noon, we had over $20 million in letters of intent. We hadn't just put on a show, we had launched a global brand overnight. 6 months later, I stood on another stage, this time at the CFDA Awards, accepting the award for Emerging Designer of the Year. The Warren brand was a phenomenon. Our Soho loft had expanded to 3 floors, and our team had grown from a loyal 7 to a thriving 50. We were the most talked about brand in New York. In my speech, I thanked Arthur for teaching me to dream. I thanked Julian for giving me a sword when I thought I had lost everything. And I thanked my team, my family, for rising from the ashes with me. I never once mentioned Isabella or the House of Devereux. They were a chapter in a book I had already closed. Later that night, I stood with Julian on the rooftop of our building, looking out at the glittering, endless New York skyline. The air was cool, the city hummed with life, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of peace. She tried to bury you, Julian said quietly, swirling the brandy in his glass. She didn't know you were a seed. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. The revenge had been necessary. It had been surgical and sweet, but what came after was even better. It wasn't about the destruction of an old life anymore. It was about the glorious, brilliant, and unstoppable creation of a new one. My new one. And it was just getting started.